Have you ever been in an exam or class and you see a question like this, but you've got no idea on how to answer it? Well, stick around because I'm going to show you a technique on how to answer any question like this so you can gain full marks. Hello and welcome, I'm Mr. Crook and this is Programming Mr. Crook, the channel where I teach programming content and exam technique. Today we're diving into some exam practice for programming questions. By the end of this video you'll have a structured approach to answering these types of questions and we'll be able to apply it to any other programming question to maximise your marks. Now my approach to answering a question like this is to first make sure we read the question. So customers at a hotel can stay between 1 and 5 inclusive nights and can choose between a basic room or a premium room. Now the hotel car park charges £4 per hour. If the car is electric, the price is halved to £2 per hour. What we need to do is write an algorithm to take the input, the number of hours the user has parked and whether the car is electric or not, calculate and output the total price, and repeat continually until the user enters 0 hours. Now you can answer this using either OCR reference language or a high-level programming language that you have studied. Now step 1 for this approach is to make sure that we understand the problem. Now we need to think about what are the inputs first of all. Now with this question we're going to have the hours parked and whether the car is electric. We're also going to have some outputs, so that's going to be the total price. So if we look at the question, it's £4 per hour. So if I park for 2 hours, that would be £8 if I do not have an electric car. If I do have an electric car, that cost is going to be halved. So that 2-hour cost is only going to cost me £4 in total. So we need to implement an algorithm that's going to be able to do that. We also need to think about the calculations that are going to be taking place. Well, it's going to be multiplication for either non-electric cars or an electric car. And we also have a condition that's going to stop the loop as well. So sometimes with these questions, I might reread these a couple of times. I might also just highlight any keywords or key information, or maybe just even make some notes, which I'm going to do. So now that I've understood the problem or what the question's asking me, I'm going to try and break it down into some manageable steps. Now we kind of spoke about this when we were thinking about understanding the problem. So we were thinking about the inputs and the outputs. Well, I'm going to think about what I need to do. I need to get some user input. I'm also going to use a check. Well, when I say get user input, I'm going to ask them their hours that they need to park for. I'm also going to ask them if their car is electric or not. So is the car electric or not? What I need to do is check their input as well. So have they entered electric or not? So I could use an if statement here. And I need to calculate the price. Just going to check my spelling as well. Dependent on the values they enter. And I also want to display the result to them. And the final thing I need this to do is repeat this program or loop this program until they enter 0. And again, I'm just going to check my spelling that we've got here. So now we've broken down this program, we're going to move on to the next step. Now that I've understood the problem and I've broken it down to manageable steps, I'm going to think about the variables which I'm going to need to store the data. So I've just written in my Word document just here something called variables. So I'm just going to start thinking about what variables I need for this program. Now I'm going to need a variable for the hours, so I'm going to write that in there. I'm also going to need the car type, so is it electric or not as well, so that's something which I can use. And I also need a variable for the final cost, and I need some kind of variable for the while loop to keep it running as well. So I'm just going to say running variable. Let's just say it as that. That's going to be my running variable. And I'm just going to say while. So that's what I'm going to use for this. Now this running variable is the thing that we're going to flag as not running anymore once we enter 0. So I've got my variables now. Now I'm going to try implementing this code. Well, I'm just going to try and go through this step by step. Now I know that I'm going to need a while loop here, so I'm going to create a variable called running, and I'm going to set that to be equal to true. I'm just going to unbold this just so it's got a consistent look, and I'm also going to convert this to be lowercase as well. Now what I can do in here is I can create my while loop. So I'm just going to say while running equals true. So we're always going to be looping this. Now I'm writing this in Python code. As I said, you can use OCR reference language, or you can use a high-level language. I'm just going to stick with Python because that's my language that I prefer. So what I need to do is I'm going to ask the user how many hours have they parked for. So I'm going to use that hours variable. And I want this to be stored as an integer. I'm just going to take whole numbers, and I'm going to use my input function here. And I'm just going to say enter number of hours. So something like that would suffice. Now with this, I'm going to first check if they've entered 0 into this. This is what's going to break me out the loop. So what I'm going to say, if the value stored in hours is equal to 0, then we can flag running as being false. The other thing I can also do is I can just put a break statement in, which will get me to exit this loop as well, and any of the other code won't continue running. So we've got this here. I'm going to keep with the same indentation. Now the other thing which I'm going to do is I'm going to ask the user what type of car they've got. So I'm just going to create a variable called electric. Now we said car type, let's just stick it as electric. And this is where I'm going to ask them to enter either a yes or no. So we're going to use the input function again. And my statement to them is the car electric? And I'm just going to prompt them to enter Y or no. So yes or no, we'll just stick with a single Y or a single N. Now within here, we can do an if statement. And what we can say is, well, if they enter electric, so let's say if electric, and let's test the value which is in here. So if this is equal to a Y, then our price variable is going to be equal to hours, and we can just times that by 2. Now the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to use another condition. So if they've entered Y, our price should be calculated properly. However, if it hasn't and they enter anything else, I'm just going to say that the price is going to be times by 4. It's going to equal the hours they entered times by 4, and I think that should be okay. Now the final thing which I just need to do is output that cost to the user. So what I'm going to say is print. I'm just going to say total cost. I'm going to put the pound symbol in just to make it a bit neater, and I'm going to output that price variable that I've got here. Now what I like to do is just double check that I've implemented everything. It's always a good idea just to go back and reread the code. I know we broke it down. So the car park charge is £4 per hour. If the car is electric, the price is going to be £2 per hour. We need to write an algorithm to do this. So first we've got our variable for running. We said that's true. So while running equals true, we are going to ask the user how many hours they need to stay for. If they enter 0, we're going to break out of that loop. If they enter, let's say 2, we can then ask them if they've got an electric car. So let's say that we've got our hours here, they've entered 2. If it is that, we're going to charge them £2 per hour. If the car is not electric, we're going to charge them. So comparing that code to the question, that's looking okay to me. Now the final thing, just to check that I'm getting the full marks, is just to test it with some data. What I'm going to do is I'm first going to put a value in for 3 hours, and I'm going to say it's electric. So if we just run this through, we're going to say 3 hours, and the car is electric. So that means that we're going to get 3 times 2, which should give us the value of 6. And we output that. So that should be correct. I'm now going to try it with 2 hours with a car that is not electric. So we're going to put 2 into here. It's not electric, so the price should be times by 4, so that should give us an output of 8. The final thing I'm going to do is just to end it properly, and I'm just going to enter the value 0 into here. So if hours equals 0, because that's the end of the program, our program should stop looping and it should break out of this loop, which is what we've got. So that seems to be working okay. So just to go through those steps one more time, what we did was we understood the problem, so we reread it a couple of times. We thought about the inputs, the outputs, maybe some calculations that we need to do. Is there a condition to stop the program as well? We also broke it down into manageable steps, such as thinking about getting user input, asking an if statement depending on the car type, doing the correct calculation, and displaying the result, thinking of those things. The third thing we did was we created the variables that we're going to use within our program. And then the fourth step is we implemented that code. Once we had a good understanding and we thought about our variables, we were able to implement that. The final thing is we tested our program to check it works, which it does, so I'm quite happy with that. So next steps for you guys is you can try this 5-step approach to similar coding questions. And if you follow this approach, you should be able to maximize your marks. Now, if you found this video useful, please like the video, please subscribe to my channel and turn on notifications. And again, you can also check out my TES page, which there'll be a link in the description where you can also look at some similar resources. Have a great day. Goodbye. If you found today's video useful, I'm just going to point you to the direction of my TES page. I've got a load of programming guides on here, a load of programming questions for you to practice. This is perfect for a teacher or a student that wants to brush up on their Python skills. There's also some free samples on there, or you've got the option of buying the full version as well. I'll put the link in the description.